Good evening. I've just been a little bit slow realising that the meeting has started because I was faffing around with some technology, so apologies to anybody who's already dialed in. My name's Councillor Paula, Paula Widdowson. I happen to be one of the councillors on the exec team for Environment and Climate Change. Welcome to our big conversation this evening. We've got a plethora of experts for you to ask questions to, but first of all, we're going to start off with the debate. So, as I said, welcome and thanks for joining our live discussion and Q&A as part of our big conversation. Today, we're looking at the core strategies survey that many of you have completed. I've just lost my place, apologies. Many of you have completed over the last month. Some highlights of what you said, the strategies it'll form and the challenges that we are addressing as a city and as a nation. Firstly, I want to say thank you to over the 1,900 respondents who live, work and study in the city and who've taken the time and added their voice to the residents and businesses core strategy survey. This has given us plenty of valuable insight into how residents feel about getting around the city, jobs and skills in the city, and how together we need to reduce our carbon footprint and do our part in tackling climate change. We know the survey won't have reached everybody in the city, so even though the survey has now closed, we will be analysing the data and carrying out focus groups to each member of the population that we know we haven't heard from and groups that are underrepresented. The core strategy survey will then go on to inform 3 major strategies shaping the future of our city, and these are the local transport plan, a new economic development strategy, and our brand new council climate change strategy. We asked you a whole range of questions from how you get around the city to what mode of transport you'd like to use in an ideal world. We asked about the impact of the pandemic on your job prospects and how work in the city might change after the pandemic. We also asked you for your thoughts on our ambitious targets of being net zero by 2030 and how you think we should go about reducing our city's carbon footprint. Your views and comments have been heard, whether in direct answers, comments left in the free text box, or social media conversations that have been going on over the past month or so. Tonight, we'll unpack some of the early analysis of the data and what our next steps might look like as a city as we address these big topics and tackle the issues of pollution, industry changes, congestion, and road safety. We will be addressing some questions that were left in the survey itself, but we also invite viewers this evening to continue to comment with your questions as the evening goes on, and we hope to get around to answering as many as possible. I'd now like to thank each of our panellists for joining me this evening and ask them to go around and introduce themselves. Tell us what you do, tell us why you're here, and let's have a great discussion this evening. So if I start with Rebecca.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Hill. I'm here representing Indie York, which is an association for over 220 independent businesses in the city centre. I also have my own independent business. I have Galtrey's Lodge Hotel and Forest Restaurant on Low Petergate. And then as a side, I'm also on the executive committee of the Hospitality Association in York as well. And I know that some of what we're going to discuss is hospitality related, so I can come in on those points as well.
Fantastic. Julian, I'm just going around my screen. Can't hear you. You need to unmute.
Hello, sorry, yes, caught by surprise there. Yes, my name is Julian Ridge. I am the Sustainable Transport Manager for City of York Council, so it falls to me to write the local transport plan.
With a lot of help from your friends?
With help from many friends, including Civic Trust members and a whole plethora of technical officers within the council.
Fabulous. Thank you. Kiran, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yep, I'm Kiran Trehen and I'm Pro-Vice-Chancellor for Partnerships and Engagement at the University of York. Really excited to be kind of talking about the kind of economic development and particularly, the opportunities for small and medium-sized enterprises this evening.
Many thanks. Andrew, would you like to introduce yourself?
Councillor Andrew Waller. I'm Executive Member for Economy and Strategic Planning, Councillor for Westfield Ward.
Thank you. Simon, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, Simon Brereton, Head of Economic Development at the Council. My job is really to make sure that when we put our new economic strategy together, as many voices as possible get heard in that. Really conscious that often when people go about writing economic strategies, it's the voices of those businesses we know already that get represented in this. And I want to make sure that all of those experiences that people have of working and earning in York are reflected in our strategy.
Perfect, thank you. Shaun, on to you.
Shaun Gibbons, Head of Carbon Reduction at City of York Council. I'm here to introduce the climate change strategy and will also be responsible for delivering the strategy.
Thank you. Tony, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thanks, Paula. Good evening, all. I'm Tony May. I've spent the last 30 years off and on working with cities in the UK and across Europe, helping them develop local transport plans. Now in retirement, I'm chairing the Transport Advisory Group of York Civic Trust. And we were delighted earlier in the year to be invited by the council to provide some advice on the new local transport plan, on the clear understanding that it's the city's local transport plan and not the Civic Trust.
Many thanks, Tony. Andy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Councillor Andy Dagorn, Executive Member for Transport, and very much appreciate the contributions from both Julian and Tony to working on our local transport plan.
Many thanks. As you can see, we have absolute breadth and depth in expertise for this evening. I'm just going to paint a very small picture of how all the three strategies fit together, and then we're going to take each strategy in turn. Just so that you know where we're going first, Shaun, we're going to start with the climate change strategy. So, as everybody knows, everything interacts with everything else. There's that famous phrase, isn't there, from I think it was from a childhood book, you know, butterflies' wings, and then you get a storm in Hawaii. So we all know that everything and everybody interacts. So you've got the transport strategy, you've got the economic strategy, and you've got the climate change strategy, all of which will interlink. If we get more cars and buses in, do we get more money spent? Does the city become more profitable? What happens to the air quality? It's those types of things we need to think through. How could we get more people walking? What else could we get up to? So it is everything interacting that we really need to think about, which is why it is so important that we talk about it in the largest possible view, and we each take responsibility for our own actions. We're not asking you to stop doing anything. We're not asking you to start doing anything. What we're asking you to look at is, what could the impact be? How could I make this more interesting for me? How could I make this more enjoyable for me? What needs to happen? So that's the picture behind it in the broadest possible terms. But I'm going to go across to Shaun and a couple of questions. Well, in fact, no, tell me what you know so far from the feedback on the survey, bearing in mind, I know it hasn't fully completed yet.
Thanks, Paula. I'm just going to set the scene briefly with a very quick introduction. City of York Council has set an ambitious aspiration for York to be a net zero carbon city by 2030. And this ambition recognises the significance and severity of the climate emergency and would see York reduce its emissions in line with the Paris Agreement and contribute to limiting global temperature increase to below 1.5 degrees. Our previous climate change framework and action plan was created in 2010, and that set a target for a 40% reduction in city emissions by 2020. That was based on a 2005 baseline. That's a target that we're on track to achieve, with a 37% reduction up to 2018, which is the most recent year for which data is available. However, our new strategy must reflect this new level of ambition that we've set ourselves, going further and wider than before. This is a citywide ambition that requires a citywide strategy, which is why we're keen to engage as many people as possible to get a wide range of views that will support the development of our climate change strategy. In direct response to your question, Paula, we set out the vision for our strategy in the consultation, and that vision was for a City of York climate change strategy that will set the vision and outline for a net zero carbon and climate resilient city by 2030, providing a clear route map of the changes required and be followed by an action plan of how this change will be delivered. And positively, through the consultation process, 80% of respondents agree with this vision for our climate change strategy, showing broad acceptance for a need to decarbonise by 2030. Early findings also show that about 80% of respondents think that there is an important role for both the local council, national government and businesses of York to play in tackling the climate emergency and reducing our carbon emissions. Oh, you're muted still, Paula.
One day I'll crack technology, one day. It is a fantastic response that we're getting from people and massive, massive engagement. I'm a little bit nervous. Okay, so we're saying carbon net zero. First of all, what does that mean to somebody like me? You know, make sure I understand it. And by 2030, when we've only got 30-odd% there, what do you think? What do you think? How do you think we can get there? But start with, what does carbon net zero mean, please?
Yeah, tough question. So carbon net zero doesn't mean absolute zero. There is an acceptance that there will still be residual carbon emissions. We will still be emitting carbon in 2030. But what net zero carbon does do is it commits us to a big decrease in our carbon emissions as a city. And for those remaining emissions, we can do something called carbon offsetting, which means it is a way in which we can net off these residual emissions through projects that remove carbon from the atmosphere, such as tree planting or reduce carbon emissions in other areas. In York, I think it's important to emphasise that we would look to prioritise offsetting projects within our own city boundaries, so keeping the offset within York before we look outside our boundaries. Is it achievable? Yes, I think we can achieve it. A large number of actions that we can take right now that would reduce our carbon emissions, but there are also solutions and innovations that we don't yet know about, which will be developed and come online over the next 9 years. It will be really important to take no regret actions early and increase the rate and scale of transition to a net zero carbon sector over the years.
I remembered to unmute myself first. So that is fascinating. Now, Kiran, I know that you're going to have an awful lot of insight and questions on this area. What are your thoughts so far about what Shaun said?
I think it's really, really important that we work collectively and in partnership, because that's going to be the key. And I think, Shaun, in you highlighting that, it's almost like, you know, we often think of these things as challenges, don't we? And actually, they're really new opportunities for us in all sorts of ways. You know, and I know from a university perspective, we've been working really hard in partnership with the community, with the students, to make sure that we deliver that. This isn't something that we can do by ourselves. You know, we do this collectively through the community, through the businesses, through the public services that we have. And I think that's a really important message. It's about the opportunity, not just about the challenge.
And I absolutely echo that, Kiran. It is really, really is about opportunity. There is so much change that we can make. I mean, it's probably a very, very, very minor example. I normally ride my bike an awful lot. Why do I ride my bike? I actually ride my bike because it's quicker and cheaper. I don't ride my bike because I'm doing what Shaun tells me to do, but I do it because it's much more effective for me to get around the city in that manner. So it's, what is it that works for you and how can we work with people? And then it's really quite entertaining. Somebody sees somebody like me on a bike, and the next thing is they go, well, you know, if I've seen her on a bike, she can do it, I certainly can do it. And it cascades its way through. But it is all about working together and showing how we can work in partnership and what we can do. And change the subject slightly, Shaun, because, you know, with my hat on as environment and climate change exec, I get to look after the bins all the time. So, you know, that nice hot subject of waste. So thinking about waste and recycling, and I know we've had a huge input from our residents, over 7,500 of them responded to the survey. What role do you think that has to play in our carbon ambition?
I think we have a slide to show that shows contribution of waste to total emissions from the city. If that can go on screen now. Waste contributes about 2.7% of York's total emissions. It's not huge, but it's also not an insignificant proportion. That number will have gone down considerably. This data is taken from 2018. I'm sure lots of people know that since about midway through 2018, we stopped sending waste to landfill in York. We decommissioned the landfill site. All of our waste is now sent to Northallerton Waste Recovery Park, where it is separated for anaerobic digestion, recycle it, and any remaining municipal waste is incinerated for energy recovery. And that has had an even more significant impact on reducing emissions associated with waste, a really positive impact on reducing emissions associated with waste. But there are still emissions associated with energy recovery, and we need people to reduce the amount of waste that they're producing in the first place. This can be on a personal level, but also businesses reducing the amount of packaging that they're using, and then also increase the amount of recycling that's done as well, and we're supporting that through our waste policies.
Okay, thank you for that. Shall we unshare the screen?
We can.
It's a fascinating, what fabulous data that you've got to work with there. So I'm looking very quickly at that. It was mainly housing and then transport and then other buildings.
Yeah, that's right. Buildings contribute about 60% of our emissions as a city, domestic buildings accounting for about 30%, non-domestic the other 30%, and then transport, of course, is the other large emitting sector, accounting for almost 28% of our city's carbon emissions. But if we're reducing our emissions, if we're aiming for net zero carbon by 2030, it's really, really important to understand where we're at now. And we've spent quite a significant amount of time understanding the baseline for where we're at now, which will enable us to monitor progress on an annual basis over the next few years to see if we're on track for our net zero by 2030 aspiration.
But that is really, really important. You know, we've got to know where we are before we know where we can get to. And we need to understand the steps. And I've seen the research behind it, and you've done a fantastic job with the different universities in getting that data and getting that action plan. So again, I'm going to invite other people to ask some questions in a minute, but, you know, looking at those charts, what could I, as an individual, do to make a difference? What would be your top three?
Top three. I mean, the majority, whilst the council is responsible for carbon emissions from its own corporate activities, from heating and powering our offices, from business travel, from waste, actually the emissions associated just from council activities are relatively small across the city. Of course, we have a wider influence from things like how we collect and dispose of waste, which we just talked about, or the provision of transport infrastructure, or through the planning process. But actually, the majority of carbon emissions aren't within the council's direct control or influence. And most emissions that are generated in York are based on personal decisions, primarily around how we heat and power our homes and how we get around the city. And so if I was prioritising the top three actions, they would be in those areas. So it would be about making your home more energy efficient, maybe turning down the thermostat half a degree, putting on a jumper when it gets cold.
So go on, and making it more energy efficient. So I can put my jumper on.
Yeah.
I can tell my husband to put his jumper on.
Yeah.
I can turn the heating down a bit. What else can I do in my house?
Well, you can, if your cavity walls aren't insulated, that's a really great measure to take, because not only will it reduce emissions, but it will also save you money on your heating bills. If you haven't upgraded your boiler, if your boiler is old and inefficient, look to replace that, or even better, look to install a heat pump if you can, because again, that will reduce your emissions and might even make your bills cheaper. Outside of that, definitely look at renewable tariffs, renewable energy tariffs. They're often cost comparable or even cheaper than tariffs. So again, you're reducing carbon emissions and saving yourself money. And from transport perspective, for short journeys, if you can avoid using your car, maybe walk, cycle, or use one of the e-mobility measures that are around the city, then do that. Again, not only is it better for emissions, but it's good for your health. You're getting your daily exercise, and it's often cheaper as well.
So what I'm hearing is insulate yourself with your jumper, insulate your house through the roof or the walls, get a more efficient boiler and get a better tariff, and that'll save you some money. And then improve your health by walking, cycling, or using one of the e-scooter things. Is that fair?
That's correct. Yeah.
Well, we could all do a little bit of that. Certainly, I think we could. What do you reckon, Kiran? How do we get people to do a little bit more of that? Because this is your area of expertise, getting people to do the right thing in the right way.
I think it's really important, isn't it? It's not just about doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do. I think it's about the kind of legacy that we want to leave. You know, what are the young people who have a voice in our city, in our region saying? You know, it's about their future. And they're voting with their feet, aren't they? You know, they're being kind of very vocal about the kind of society, the kind of city they want to live in. So, you know, I thought, Shaun, those were lovely. You know, each one of us has a responsibility. And if every one of us just did one or two of those things, imagine the change that we could kind of bring about. And then the second one, for me, it's about engagement. It isn't simply about what can I do. For me, this just makes good business sense. It makes good social sense. It makes good cultural sense. You know, so it isn't just about, well, it's the right thing to do, because we don't always do the right thing, you know, and we all know exercise is good for us. Doesn't mean that we're going to kind of do it. So I'm much more of the view that actually it's an engaging process. How do we engage? And it's not a top-down approach, but a bottom-up one. You know, what do those small things kind of mean for the communities that we live in, that we work in and we reside in? And actually, you know, the whole slide about food waste, I know when I moved to York, I was absolutely fascinated by the work that we were doing, you know, with our partners around the bioeconomy, you know, and watching what happens to food waste and how we can reinvest and reinvent that, so that we actually create, through the bioeconomy, through Bio Yorkshire, different kinds of fuel sources, which is really quite exciting and really imaginative. You know, I remember seeing this wonderful machine, and it just looked like an industrial washing machine. And I watched the bins of waste being put into it, and then what got churned out and what we could do with that as biofuel was really exciting. So that's what I mean about engagement. Let's take the research, you know, the knowledge on the ground, the expertise that we have, you know, across our city, and put that evidence to work to kind of create the sustainable future, you know, for us all that we've been talking about.
That is fantastic. And what I'm hearing from all of us is this is doable. It can be lots of little small steps, which will massively add up to a great big change. Now, I could bore for Britain on this subject, because this is what I do most of the time. And I even get told off by my husband after the second glass of wine, would you please just move on? So I haven't had my second glass of wine yet, but I'm going to move on. So I'm now going to address the local ask of experts to talk about the local transport plan. So we've got Councillor Gorn, who's the lead in this area, Julian, who's the officer, and in my head, sometimes Julian, most people don't understand what that means. You are the person that does the doing for the council. And then we've also got Tony, who introduced himself earlier, who's got a lot of expertise in this area. So Andy, shall I hand over to you?
Okay, yes, well, I think as you've heard, the transport makes up a significant proportion of our carbon emissions. So it's a really important aspect from that point of view, but also as a city, it has a big impact on the atmosphere, the air quality, the way that we operate in the city centre, the way that businesses operate, and the way that people can get about, you know, whether there's good cycle routes, bus routes, those sorts of things are all key aspects that, and although there's, in terms of the policy, We have a policy which we adopted in 2011, which sort of set out a strategy going up to 2030, but it only had a detailed plan for the first 5 years. So we do need to refresh that and to actually look at how that takes account of changes that have happened since 2013. You know, we've got a big community stadium at Monk's Cross. We've got e-scooters available for people. We've got lots of technical changes as well. So it's bringing it up to date and making sure that we're taking all the opportunities to provide sustainable travel options for people, make it as attractive as possible as an alternative to the car.
Yeah, absolutely. That's brilliant. Now, Julian, do you want to give us the background so that then, you know, we can get Andy and the other guys to ask you questions on it?
Yes, of course. Yes. I mean, it really is as Councillor de Gorn was saying, I mean, it really, transport is the jam in the sandwich. You've got, you know, the need to keep the economy running on one side, and you've got the need to mitigate the environmental damage that you can cause by getting transport wrong or on the other. So we've been doing the various surveys that we've been doing over the last 6 weeks or so. They have actually been incredibly useful and incredibly revealing, because they've told us about some of the things that people might want to do to change the way that they use transport to help deliver some of the targets that Shaun is tasked with delivering through the carbon reduction plan. So, you know, we know, for instance, from from the feedback that we've received from people, that there are quite a large number of people in York who are considering changing their car to an electric vehicle in the future. There is quite a lot of interest, as has already been mentioned, in things like the e-scooters and e-cycles. And I think there is a view, as you often find, that perhaps some of the options that we have at the moment, which people might transfer to if they're using their car less, aren't quite, you know, people don't view them as quite good enough. So there are, you know, there is work that we have to do developing our bus offer and making some of the cycle lanes and footpaths that we have feel safer to use. So, I mean, what's coming out of it is very interesting, and there's a part that everyone can play in, you know, delivering change there.
And there is, and that's the story we're hearing tonight, is that it's lots of different ways that we can all do our bit. So I don't know which one to ask this to. Tony, EVs alone, do you think they could solve the York transport problem?
Well, they can clearly contribute to reducing carbon emissions and to some extent to reducing pollution, but there's an underlying issue with what you asked me, which is, what is the transport problem? And for me, the really interesting point here is we're talking about climate change, we're talking about the economy, and transport can contribute to both of those, but it can also contribute to so much else in the city. For example, safety, public health. We've talked about the benefits of walking and cycling for individual health. There's the whole question of fairness in our communities and making sure that everybody in the city can get to the places they want to. And at the moment, there are some quite marked divides, for example, between people near the city centre and people in the villages. So transport can contribute to making York a more accessible and amenable place. And for me, the key starting point in developing a transport strategy is being clear as to what it is we want to achieve. And for me, the results of the survey are really helpful in pointing us towards that, because people are saying we need to reduce congestion, people are saying we need to reduce air pollution, people are saying we need to tackle climate change. And if that's right, and those are the top three priorities, then we can start designing a transport strategy to meet them. But if you go back to your question, one thing that switching to EVs will not do is reduce congestion. So if congestion's a concern, we need to be doing other things as well.
Because isn't it, the roads are congested because everybody get off the roads and it's okay for me to carry on driving? Isn't that kind of what we all do? We know that the EVs will really help with the air pollution, but congestion is somebody else's problem. Just please get out of my way. How do we, come on, Andy, you're great at these types of things. What's in your head that we can nudge people towards more public transport or walking more? Or
like you say,
what do you think we need to do?
I think certainly a lot of people, leave the pandemic, the experience this time last year or a little bit before that, the first lockdown, we were actually told, if you remember, we were told that we should have daily exercise, and even if we're working from home, everyone then gleefully used that as an excuse to get out of the house and go for a little walk or a bike ride. And the fact that we've all collectively gone through that experience where we saw, a massive reduction in the level of traffic on the road, and massive increase in the level of cycling and walking, and people using local shops, for the sort of local facilities where suddenly we realised how important they were. It is that sort of change that we need to somehow encapsulate in going forward, so that as we return to using buses and walking and then working from the office perhaps a bit more than we have been in the last year, but we actually don't lose the benefits of what we've learned in this horrendous experience that we've had to endure. We have seen that there is a different way of doing things, and how do we actually collectively achieve that and work towards that as a vision, what we want to have as a city.
And I absolutely agree. I mean, the last year, 18 months has been horrendous on lots of levels, but as with anything, there's been some real bright spots, and we can learn different things from it. So one of the things that came through in the last year, Julian, talking about transport in general, not just about our own personal transport, is the last mile trial that we're doing, because the last mile trial of the big heavy goods vehicles through a medieval city doesn't really help us. Do you want to just give a couple of minutes on that and how you see that working in this area?
Yes, of course. I mean, we're doing some work with DEFRA at the moment, looking with the Department of Food.
And say, who's DEFRA?
Rural Affairs. It's the Department of Farming and Rural Affairs, strangely enough, who are in charge of climate change. So for transport, because transport is so important in terms of air quality and climate change, we have to do quite a lot of work with government departments who are not the Department for Transport. But we have some money, I think it's about £300,000, which we are using to investigate the potential for having what's called a transshipment centre, where people where heavy lorries would call and their goods would be taken off the lorry and put onto a smaller vehicle, a van perhaps, or maybe even an e-cargo bike. There's a huge variety of goods that come in and out of the centre of York, and there are probably a whole mixture of ways that you can accommodate those and carry them more efficiently. And what we would hope to get out of it is lower levels of large heavy vehicles in the city centre. It could reduce congestion because we would get fewer vehicles loading where we don't want them to. We have problems with vehicle strikes in some of our historic streets. I don't know if the corner of the shop that sticks out in Stonegate has been patched more times than I can remember. So that there are a whole load of huge benefits that we are hoping we can get to through this process. At the moment, it's a pilot and it's a study, and it complements a whole load of other things we're doing. We're about to launch a pilot project for e-cargo bikes, which we have some money from the Energy Savings Trust to buy a relatively small number of e-cargo bikes. I think it's about half a dozen. But we're hoping to work with some businesses to see if they would like to borrow the e-cargo bikes. And
see, unfortunately, Julian, when you said that, I heard the music for the bread, the Hovis bread, and I saw you pushing the e-cargo bike. up the steps. I'm really sorry, but
No, they're great.
that would be absolutely brilliant. We haven't got a hill in York, so you'd be
Well,
fine.
and they're electric, so you'll never, they push you.
Brilliant. I'm just going to bring Tony in because Tony wants to ask a question, and then I'm going to ask you, Julian, so you can prepare yourself for this, how we balance, in fact, all three of you, and we've only got a few minutes, how we balance access to the city centre for the big goods vehicles, for the individual pedestrian, for the family that want it pedestrianised, for the cyclists that want to cycle through it, for the disabled, giving disabled people the access, etc., etc., etc. There are a multitude of people asking for a multitude of things from villages into the city, and it's how, I know that's what the local transport plan is, but I want a very short answer on that one. But Tony, you go first.
Well, just before we come on to that, I wanted to pick up something that Andy had said about learning over the last 18 months. And one of the really interesting developments has been the growth in working from home. And obviously not everybody can do it, but that growth has meant something like a 1/3 reduction in commuting. And you can see the effect of that now on York streets, particularly in the morning when there's much less traffic, far shorter queues. And the sort of thing that the local transport plan can do is help facilitate that. And what do people need if they're going to work from home? Well, they need local facilities that they can walk to in their lunch break. If they've got a small office or a small bedroom at home, then a community hub that they can work from. So there are real opportunities there for working with the grain of that major change in behaviour and supporting it longer term.
I absolutely agree with you, Tony. And again, going back to where Julian's going to help us and Andy in balancing all the things, you've got everything from people wishing to work from home to certainly I know of 2 businesses in York, and Andrew will know an awful lot more, who are insisting that you've got to go into work, all the way through to Google and Apple, who said if you don't turn up on the 1st of September, you have got a job. So there's a whole mixture in how each business, I'll put my teeth in, how each business wishes to work in the current set of circumstances, and how each individual wishes to work with their business or work with, retrain, reskill, do whatever is best for them. But before we go on to that, which is Andrew's the absolute expert in this, Julian, come on, help me. Andy, you can pitch in as well. How do we balance all those 101 different requests?
Gosh, it's really difficult. I sometimes think that what I'd really like to do with the local transport plan is bid for an enormous amount of money to rebuild York.
And go on holiday?
Well, no, I thought rebuild York about 10 miles north of where it is with big. we have such a shortage of street. I think it is really hard, and I mean, I think the answer to the question really is with a lot of forethought and a great deal of care, and we try and do the best we can, and I think it is it is always going to be difficult to accommodate all those uses in the city centre, but it is a question of talking to people, and it is a negotiation in effect.
Absolutely. And Andy, I have just been nudged, so I'm afraid we're going to have to come back to that question when we've done the strategy side, because I've been told I've been twittering a bit too long. So if we move on to our 3rd strategy, and again, you can see how these are all interlinked and how they all wrap together. The 3rd strategy is the economic development one, and the experts in that area are Councillor Andrew Waller, Simon Brereton, and Rebeca Hill, and we're also going to bring Kiran back in at that point as well. I should call you Professor Trehen, shouldn't I? I have got a very bad habit of calling everybody by their first name. When somebody says a title to me, I start looking for my mother-in-law, which is always a little bit of a worry. So if we start, Simon, could you give an overview and an outline, and then we'll bring in the various experts behind you?
Of course, I will try and do that. And if I start veering off into detailed statistics, I'm sure you'll stop me, because I think that's the thing about the economy is there's one level of understanding it, which is all about facts and figures and detail. But really, it's quite simple, the economy. It's about how people make a living. And the purpose of our economic strategy is to really explore as a city what we can help to do, what we can do to help businesses thrive, to help create jobs and opportunity, and to bring new investment that help our residents to earn a decent living. We've got lots of stats, as I say, in terms of what businesses do, the jobs that people have, and what people earn. But what we've been trying to find out through the questionnaire, two questionnaires actually, because we've got the one on with residents, but also we've got a business questionnaire we've been doing as well. So with residents, what we've been trying to get to understand is what do people think about the opportunities that they have to earn in York. Are they able to use the skills that they have? Are they able to find the right kind of work? We know for many people in York, the challenge is not only can I get a job, but can I get a job that allows me to fit all the other things I need to do in my life beyond simply earning money. York is a beautiful place to live, but quite an expensive place to live in, we know. And what that means really is that we have a lot of households in York where there's more than one person earning. We have a lot of people working fewer than 37 hours a week. I don't like using the word part-time because it's got so many negative connotations. And we talk about part-timers as if they're not really involved, but that balance of work in York is really important. But we know that actually the opportunities to work fewer than 5 days a week, 9 till 5, are a bit limited, and they push people into working in some of our lower paid industries as well. So what do the people of York think about that? Those don't come across purely from the statistics, so we want to know about that. We want to know about what our businesses want and need to help them grow and develop. And some really interesting stuff's come back from the business survey around some of the things that you've just been touching on with in terms of transport and climate change. About 30% of businesses expect more of their staff to work from home in the future. Fits very well with that stat that Tony just quoted as well. About 40%, so 2 out of 5 businesses in York are actually rethinking the workspace that they have, and that includes where they workspace is as well as what it is, and that will have a big impact in terms of how people get to and from work. And at the same time, there are about 1 in 5 businesses in York are actually struggling to fill vacancies, despite the fact that unemployment has gone up like it has everywhere through the pandemic. So there's some real interesting things that come through in all of that. And if you then go on to think about, well, how do businesses, you touched on where do businesses think that they need, how do we get businesses involved in that climate change agenda? Only 1 in 6 of the businesses that came back to our survey have actually set any kind of target in terms of carbon reduction. So most haven't really. And actually about half of businesses in York see the cost of parking as a real challenge. So they would like to see more people either coming to work or coming as customers in a car. So there's some real challenges in there, aren't there?
There are.
And the economy brings all of those things through. But say if my kind of elevator pitch for what's the economic strategy about is it's there to really help the people of York make a decent living. And we know that there's a lot more we can do. Actually, York has got a pretty strong economy, and if you compare what people earn in York to places around us, actually your pay in York is higher than it is in most places around us. But the real challenge, as I say, is in jobs which aren't 5 days a week, which do earn a bit less than is needed. And we set that real living wage as our target, say £9.50 an hour, as the kind of a baseline for what's a decent.
I'm going to stop you there, Simon, because otherwise I'm going to get into trouble again. I'm going to ask Rebecca to come in, and then Andrew. The reason for asking Rebecca is that I've just realised that she's moved to one side of my screen and I couldn't see her. So Rebecca, if you would, knowing what Simon's painted as the picture there, what are your thoughts on the area?
I think it's always going to be a challenging one, and I'm going to try and remain reasonably diplomatic, because when you've got 220 businesses as your members, you don't want to alienate anybody by saying anything in one direction or another. I think as a whole, Indie York is a very environmentally friendly, environmentally conscious group. We have an environmental champion who's a lady who's involved in One Planet York, and she's helping businesses make those small steps that we've talked about before to be, going in the right direction. Having said that, on a bigger picture, there are challenges. You know, we're talking about transport. You know, I have a restaurant. You know, I need my deliveries to get into the centre of York. And I think that as a collection of quite small businesses, I'm not sure that any of us really know how we're going to sort of tick both boxes, you know what I mean, with wanting to be more environmentally conscious and certainly supporting this goal that we've got for 2030. But realistically, you know, if we don't have the supplies that we need to have the businesses, we're then not going to be economically buoyant, which is obviously what Simon's referring to. So it is very challenging, and I think from an Indie York perspective, we want to be involved in these conversations to see how we can make it work for us, you know, with our sort of small businesses, but being quite a big collection of businesses. There's a few questions that I think our members might have. You know, going back to your very simple suggestions of can we insulate ourselves and you know, maybe our heating can go down both domestically and commercially. You know, York has a reasonably big question around planning permissions, and you know, I live and work in a listed building, and it would be really nice to be able to put some sort of sustainable, environmentally friendly but secondary glazing or double glazing or something, of which there are options out there, but I think they get declined quite often, so that could be a question.
No, we're on to that. Sorry, Rebecca, we're on to that. I've had Shaun pushing me, right. And I know that Andrew's right behind it as well. We are reviewing all the different ways that we can look at historic buildings. We're looking at what the various policies could be, because they do have to match up. We don't want to knock everything down. We don't want to make it look like a carbuncle, but we do know that it's got to be great for the 21st century. But before we go into the various different details and the different questions we've got, can I bring the other two in and then we'll come back to your questions? Is that okay?
Yeah.
So, all right, Andrew, this is your area of expertise, and I know you know everything about it all. So what do you, because you sat in, well, the chair that I'm sat in, I inherited from you, and you have done the environment and climate role beautifully for years. Now you're doing the economy role equally beautifully, and you're marrying the two together. So what are your thoughts on this area?
Well, the last 18 months have accelerated many of the changes in the high street, in the way that businesses do business. And also businesses have taken the time to plan ahead a lot more in terms of, everyone talks about green jobs. Well, how do we make sure that York gets its share of those? A key part of that is having the skills training. And I know Kiran has been involved a lot with matching the need of businesses in the city with the residents, but also looking at STEM, and that's science, technology, engineering and mathematics, and bringing more women into that area, which has been a deficiency in the past, but making sure that we fully utilise the skills of all residents, recognising that we are in the city centre and historic core, and therefore there are issues with renewable power PVs and, as mentioned, windows, but they're not insurmountable. And I think that certainly really would love the Civic Trust to be involved in those discussions about how we retain the quality, but also accept that there are new products that could really make the difference, and York could be a leader in that. I remember talking with one of the canons at York Minster, who was keen to have PVs on the top of the Minster. Sure, that was not necessarily going to happen instantly, but I think that certainly with the investment that's come from government, and York College and Askham Bryan College have really reached out to maximise that with electronic vehicle maintenance at York College, the investment there, but also with e-learning at Askham Bryan. So there's a real engagement with looking forward. Thanks. Fantastic.
Kiran, how Andrew's already talked a little bit about you on the skill set, but how do you fit into all of these areas?
In a number of ways. So let me go back to a couple of points that Rebeca raised, because I think it's really, really, really important. You know, the pandemic showed the innovation of our small and medium-sized businesses in York. And let's not forget our independence, because actually the heart of the economy at York is built by some of those kind of independent businesses. And so I think what we've been able to kind of do is to demonstrate in a number of ways how they have been both inspiring, but also raising the aspirations, you know, within the context of our community. So that whole skills agenda is really, really important. It's not about just simply saying, well, you know, it's doing a really great search around what's our 10-year strategy? What skills are we going to need, not today, but of tomorrow? So I call it something like nurturing a York innovation ecosystem. Now that's what you'd expect an academic to say, wouldn't you? And if I was on the ground, when I talk to my neighbours about that, then they say, what does that actually mean, Kiran? So what does that mean? That means about nurturing the talent that we have in every aspect, you know, in our communities, in our universities, in our colleges, and in our schools. And by innovation, I mean opening ourselves up for change. And an ecosystem simply means anchoring our talent so they stay here, but nurturing that talent. And then the second point I want to go back to about sustainable buildings. You know, I am so proud of the work that we've collectively done on the Guildhall. So the Guildhall is one of the most historical buildings in York. And what we're going to be able to kind of do now is to open that facility up to develop skills and training for the next generation, but also for our SMEs, you know, for our small and medium-sized enterprises, to provide them with the kind of support that they need, both to start up and scale up. So there's incubation space to nurture that, but then there's acceleration space with the best expertise possible, you know, to be able to provide that support. Why is that important? Because we can't do this if we don't leverage what I call external investment. How do we bring investment back into the region to nurture that entrepreneurial talent? And so for me, I think York is one of the most enterprising and entrepreneurial regions. And COVID-19, you know, demonstrated that in so many ways. And so the Guildhall is an incredible opportunity to work with local communities to deliver sustainable growth, but also let's not forget, you know, what I call our public mission as part of the business, you know, and economic strategy. And so that's offering opportunities for all, you know. Access to the Guildhall will be really critical to driving. But again, why is that so effective? Because we've worked in partnership, because we've engaged with those local communities. The Guildhall isn't just a university building that's, you know, which is going to look beautiful and polished. It's there for community groups. It's there for the public. There's virtual and online courses that you can begin to kind of, and then we inspire young school children to both understand our historical roots, but we have the opportunity to look at the bioeconomy, digital, creative media, all of the things that are built in the context of our heritage, but also creating what I call, you know, an economic strategy that's fit for the 21st century. But it's fit for the 21st century because everybody's had a voice in its kind of development. So I think, so that notion of anchoring our talent is really, really important.
That is fantastic, and I absolutely agree with you. And we've got lots and lots of different examples across the piece. Now, Rachel, I'm not skipping the question that you asked us, and I know that sorry, Rebecca, I'm not skipping the question that you asked us earlier because I know we answered it very, very lightly. But again, I'm getting nudged. We've got 35 minutes left, and we need to move into the next area. But we will make sure we do address the questions that your independent, your 200 plus businesses have asked you, so that they are covered within this debate. So second half of our life, again, sorry, before I move on, thank you. The expertise around this call this evening, this session this evening is fantastic. In the second half of our live stream, I'd like to encourage the viewers If you haven't already put your questions to us, please put your questions. As they're fed through, we can ask the experts that are around this table, and we'll try and do as many as possible. But what I'd like to do, my battery is deciding to die. But what I'd like to do is we start, first of all, I think this is probably one for Julian. How can the council strike the balance between enforcing change and incentivising change when it comes to carbon reduction, industry and transport? I'm going to throw that to Julian and to Shaun. So Julian, if you want to start, and then Shaun can add his questions in while I try and put a lead into my computer.
Well, a nice, easy one to start with. I think it's really difficult, isn't it? I mean, you don't want to end up in a situation where people feel got at or where they're being told what to do. So I think the answer really is we've just got to work with people and find out where they're coming from, and where residents and businesses are coming from, and how we can introduce changes to our transport system that both benefit the economy and the environment, but don't do not upset people. So I think it is a real balancing act. So, I mean, what do you think, Shaun?
I agree, Julian. I think it is a balancing act, but I think the balance is slightly tipped towards incentivisation. The reason I think that is because actually, as a local government, we have quite limited powers of enforcing and forcing anyone to do anything. There are national standards that need to be met in terms of energy efficiency for public buildings and the private rented sector, and there are increasingly tighter measures around vehicle emissions that are being introduced or gas boilers. But actually, the powers at a local level are fairly limited, so we need to embrace the ability to coerce and incentivise change more as a council by, as we've been talking about, emphasising those co-benefits, making sure that people are informed and feel empowered to make positive decisions, change that we need, and also making sure that we facilitate an easy change to those positive decisions by putting the infrastructure in place and making sure that that's there for people if they want to do that.
Fantastic. Tony, you want to come in there?
Well, we asked our Citizens Transport Forum very much this question when they met earlier in the year as input to this process. And they were clear that what is needed is a hearts and minds approach, where the council can help by explaining the alternatives. And that's obviously as relevant to domestic emissions as it is to transport. The council can help by providing the alternatives, and that's support for travelling less, working from home, but it's also support for public transport, walking and cycling. And then using the campaigns that have been around for a decade or more of public awareness, business travel plans, school travel plans, to help people to work together to identify better ways of travelling or better ways of travelling less. But you have to have, I think, up your sleeve some sticks as well as the carrots, so that if it really gets difficult to deliver this carbon neutral target by 2030, there are other means available to stimulate that.
Okay, I'm going to disagree with you on that one. I actually think the more that you can positively reinforce somebody, the more and more you'll build in that direction, only at the very, very last resort. But I do hear what you're saying, Tony.
And that's what I'm saying, Paula. It is a last resort.
Okay, that's fine. We're violently disagreeing. Sorry, violently agreeing. Sorry. Perfect. Before I come to you, Andy, we've just had a question come through on the Facebook, which I'd like to put in front of Shaun. Shaun, what we're being asked is, given that all the green grants have been scrapped by government, what can we do to help homeowners do something about their housing? Going back to the jumper theory, over to you.
Yeah, good question. So Better Homes Yorkshire is a programme that's been running since 2015 and can support homes to improve their energy efficiency. We've actually also just launched the council's home upgrade grant, which is funding that's available for both council tenants, private homeowners and private tenants as well. And we can fully or part fund home energy efficiency improvements, such as improving the energy efficiency through insulation, providing solar panels. So that's available to you as well. So if there's any viewers interested in that, they can look at your home upgrade grant.
See, I told you he has his finger on the pulse, knows where all the money is, and keeps managing to get it to us, which is fantastic. Andy, back to yourself, and apologies, I just thought we'd get that one done quickly.
I was just going to make the point that in terms of how we achieve behaviour change, if you look at the example of our electric bus service, that came out of a policy direction which the council recognised that air quality in the city centre was something we had to address. And we obviously want public transport to be sustainable, attractive and non-polluting. And so the question then is about how do you actually achieve that change? So we secured government funding to enable the private operator obviously funding from the private operator, but also government funding and a policy decision that we were going to have a clean air zone for buses on a voluntary basis, but for first in the country. But nevertheless, we tackled that problem, and we now have a virtually all electric park and ride service, and hopefully we will extend that to other bus operators and bus services as well going forward. But that's a combination of policy, bidding for funding and setting that vision so that people can see the direction of travel. And the same could apply, I think will apply very much for our strategy going forward, to how we actually deliver that change to sustainable travel.
Aren't you hiding your light under a bushel as well, Andy? Aren't you hiding your light under a bushel? Isn't your the investment that you've put into the electric fleet, along with the e-scooters, along with the e-bikes, has given for head of population, for area that it goes around, the largest electric fleet within England? Isn't that what York City Council have managed to achieve along with their clean air zone? So a fantastic result right the way across the city between all the different councillors and residents all working together. Yeah,
it is, and as I say, the fact that we've got probably some of the newest double-decker buses operating on all electric on that park and ride service, ultra clean with all the modern technology and so on, but you can want to plug your laptop in and everything else. That's what's got to be the carrot to get people. But equally, we have to make sure we've got bus priority so those buses get there more quickly than sitting in a car.
Yeah, and it's spilt over into the rest of the council because we now have electric waste vehicles. We have 3.5-ton vehicles. All of them will be electric over the next 7 years. So that policy has spilt right the way across all the different areas we're interested in. Now, I am very, very conscious of time. So we have just over 20 minutes left. And I'm going to ask each of you in turn, really, really, really difficult question. You can choose to answer first or second question. What's the biggest opportunities you see in these three strategies? Or where do you think we're going to be in 10 years' time? You can choose to answer one or the other of them. You don't have to answer them both because we'll run out of time. Kiran, I'm going to start with yourself. Which one do you want? Biggest opportunity or where we're going to be in 10 years' time?
I think where we're going to be in 10 years' time, please, because I'm a great believer that you kind of, think about the kind of future that you want. And it allows us to kind of reimagine, within that sort of sense of hope and opportunity and optimism. So in 10 years' time, we will be, without a doubt, carbon neutral. We'll have sustainable transport, sustainable housing, and sustainable businesses. But actually, what really excites me about that is, in 10 years' time, York will not only just be the best place to live, it'll be the most entrepreneurial region that there is, and it'll be the best place that people want to come to work, to live in, to work in, but also it'll be one of the most creative places where people want to kind of spend their social life as well, because it's that infrastructure, You know, that's what a new 10-year strategy, you know, is about. It's exciting, it's opportunity. And of course, it has all of the paradoxes and the tensions of how we make some of these things, you know, work. But actually, if you focus on, you know, what's possible, then sometimes even things that feel impossible right now become possible. And if I've learned one thing from COVID is people were telling me at the very start about what wasn't possible. Look at what we've managed to achieve in a space of 12 to 18 months. If we can do that then by pulling together, imagine what we could do in 10 years' time. So, you know, for me, it'll be one of the most exciting places to both live and work.
Fantastic. Councillor Andrew Waller, what do you want? Do you want what are the biggest opportunities through our strategies, or do you want to paint the picture for where we're going to be in 10 years' time?
Well, I think the biggest opportunities will be to fully utilise the talents of everyone in the city. I'm aware that not all communities benefit equally from the success of the York economy, and I think the challenge is to ensure that this is shared out, and that involves a wide range of partners working together to ensure that all of the opportunities with new jobs is matched, and that well, you know, one of the key things that came out of the last 18 months is the way in which the voice of small businesses, micro businesses, independent businesses is being heard in a way that in local government terms hasn't been heard before for a very long time.
Absolutely agree, and that is the area that will drive us to be more and more successful, entrepreneurial, the right set of skills, the right attitude. At which point, Rebecca, you must have known that was your introduction. So which question do you wish to go for? Do you want to go for opportunities or our 10-year vision?
I'll go for opportunities, and I'm going to bounce off the back of what Councillor Waller said, just to cop out a little bit. But yeah, I definitely think the biggest opportunity is the sort of resurrection and newfound love for the independent businesses. And my predecessor as chair of Indy York started a tagline that was York, a city of independence. And we had big debates on whether we could change the word a to the word the. And I think that potentially that might be where we're going. So we'll say York is the city of independence. You know, we've already got over 65% of independently owned businesses, and they all seem to be thriving off the back of the pandemic. So that can only get bigger and better. So that's our opportunity, is to change our A to the.
And that, absolutely fantastic, paints such a brilliant picture. And I don't know what anybody else is like. I'm still an incomer. I've only lived here for 26 years. So apparently I'm still not a York person. All the people that visit, all of my relatives that come from the wrong side of the Pennines, they think it's the right side of the Pennines. All of them that come, they come for the vibrancy, for the life, for the difference. It isn't like anywhere else. So, you know, you guys are doing a brilliant, brilliant job. Simon, over to you. Which one do you want?
I think I'm going to go for 10 years' time, Councillor Widdowson. And, you know, if we look ahead 10 years, I think York is actually going to be quite a different place. What the area that we talk about as York Central at the moment, which is actually our biggest opportunity in terms of growing our city centre, will be a thriving new neighbourhood full of amazing housing that really sets the stall out for what houses in the 21st century are about. The example of an urban neighbourhood in terms of how people get around, and it will be full of thriving businesses, lots of independent businesses, and also really you'll be able to see when you come into York, you'll be able to see the amazing research and innovation that comes out of our universities, because it'll be right there as you get off the train. And you'll see our bioeconomy, you'll see our creative economy, you'll see our small businesses, and York will still be the best place to come to in the whole of the country, but it will be even better than it is now. But yeah, so I think York Central 10 years from now is really going to change our city a lot. And I'll say, going back to what I said at the start, the upshot of that is that people in York will be able to earn a better living than they can at the moment, and that everyone will be able to thrive in our city.
I absolutely agree with you, Simon. I think that's a beautiful picture to paint, and it'll also be linked up across the city so that we've got what we're doing in the Castle Gateway, what's happening in Piccadilly, the developments across the city and how they're all linked, and how that works through the transport plan, and how that works through the economic plan, and how we make sure that we weave in all of the bits that we can to get us to carbon neutral. All of that, again, you can see how that meshes together and how we have to make sure that that web is, you know, absolutely spot on. Tony, you're next on my little screen. Which one would you like to go for? Do you want to go for opportunities or the 10-year vision?
Well, I'm going to take opportunities, but link it to the second question briefly at the end.
Why am I not surprised?
So for me, the real opportunity comes from the survey that you've done, and indeed the survey we did a couple of years ago, which indicates a groundswell of support in the communities in York for change, and change for the better. For example, your survey of this last month or two says 60–70% of people want to cycle more and want to walk more and would be happy to use buses more. We found a very similar figure 2 years ago, and that's where our Citizens Transport Forum came up with the idea of working together, consensus building, and encouraging this hearts and minds approach. And if we can work together, that's we, the civil society, we, the council, we, the community, we can achieve the sorts of changes and the 10-year target that Kiran so admirably outlined.
Absolutely. I mean, the energy and the positivity in this room is fantastic. Andy, I'm coming across to you.
Well, I think the biggest opportunity is the fact that it's the two strategies together, three strategies together, but particularly transport and climate change for people. I mean, everyone is aware of the desperate need that we have to reduce carbon emissions as rapidly as possible. And when you look at the news with floods and fires and so on, and I think that consciousness is really hitting home, particularly with COP26 coming up. But people do want to make a change, and we have to put in place the attractive options to help them to do that. And that is something that we have got coming within the next year for us to make those decisions about what sort of life we want to live in our city and how we want to continue that 2,000 years of history, but in a modern way.
You mentioned COP26. Has Shaun let you?
That is jargon. Apologies for that.
No, that's fine. Has Shaun let you into what he's managed to squirrel into COP26? We've got a presentation, haven't we, through, is it Pecan or the LEP?
We've got a number of case studies going. One through the Local Government Association, which is worth noting, is a case study on the community engagement and co-design process behind the New York Community Woodland. We recently concluded phase 2 of our co-design process, which is a public survey, public consultation on the design and vision for the woodland. We had some fabulous responses. We're currently in the process of turning those responses into a final woodland design plan, and that will be back out to the public to consider very shortly.
Fantastic. Julian, I think you are the last one to say whether you want the opportunity or whether you want the vision.
Well,
I think I've covered everyone.
I would like to talk about the opportunity, please. I mean, I did grow up in York, but I'm not really a Yorkshireman either because my parents weren't from York. I mean, the thing that always amazes me is if you look at the big roads in York. I mean, when I was growing up 40 odd years ago, roads like Tadcaster Road were considered very scary places for young children, and you were sort of urged to keep away from them. And I think there is a big opportunity now in a lot of what we're doing to try and reduce the sort of severance effect of roads like that, so that they can be used more by people on foot and by bike and on buses, and they can be used to access local shops. And the way that people are moving around is changing a lot, and so I think we have a big opportunity to change the assets that we manage as a council to enable those kinds of trips. And I think that that could be really quite something. So I suppose in 10 years, I'd like to think that we'd have a set of main roads which are much friendlier for people to use on accessible modes.
Well, listening to the positivity in this room, knowing that we can line everything up, making sure that Kiran leads us in the right direction, and that Rebecca makes sure that we keep doing it in the correct manner, I think the world's our oyster. I genuinely think that this is extremely doable between all of us and our residents who are so well engaged. Kiran, before I carry on, yes, you want to say something?
I want to pick up on the point that colleagues around this table have raised, because and you've just talked about that kind of inspiration. I know, and I've been both involved in that. And change can be scary. I often say we want change, but then we're also the custodians of the status quo. It's almost like we want the best of both worlds. I say I want change, and then when it happens, it's like, oh no, I'm not sure that's what I kind of imagined. So I think it's really important. I'd say three things really is the next time we are talking about a 10-year strategy and we are talking about the we and the not I, let's think about, well, who is the we, in this? And it's okay to say, well, I don't understand it all, and I am a little bit scared by it. But actually, if we work in that kind of connectivity way in terms of the we, then that's what makes everything kind of possible. And I want to go back to something that Councillor Wallace said, because I think that's so important. And then sometimes we take it for granted. The future of our region and our city as part of our 10-year strategy, it isn't just about the diversity of transport. It's not just about the diversity of our businesses. It's not just about the diversity of our housing. It has to be about the diversity of our people, because actually people make cities, people make strategy, and people make regions. And I think to everybody that's listening, I'd say I would take away 3 Ps. 10-year strategy is going to require passion, which we've all shown in abundance tonight. It's going to require some persuasiveness, because we're not always convinced by the argument. I as an academic always say, show me the evidence. Sometimes maybe it's not the evidence that I need. I need to kind of trust the people that are telling me what's going to be kind of happening. So it requires persuasiveness, but it also requires persistence. Change doesn't happen overnight. So don't ever forget the 3 Ps as far as I'm concerned as we move forward. Passion, persuasiveness and persistence. And then I think, it could be a really exciting time to be on that journey.
That is fabulous. I'm going to take that as your closing remarks, Kiran. And I'm now just going to go around to everybody to see what their closing remarks are. And then I've got a minute or so at the end, but we are into the last 10 minutes of this debate. So Tony, what are your closing remarks? What would you take away from this hour and a half?
Well, let me pick up one of the things that Kiran said, that change can be scary. Because if I have misgivings, and this is the only negative comment I'll make this evening, about where we are, there is a tendency to be frightened of the unknown. We're talking about making very significant changes over the next decade, particularly in terms of climate change. And we have to keep the momentum, and we have to be prepared to set out a plan and implement it. And we, from the Civic Trust point of view, are wholly behind the city in trying to make sure that happens, and working with the communities of York to develop an effective local transport plan and make sure that we get it implemented. So that, for me, is the real challenge of the next year.
Absolutely, and I think everybody's heading in the same direction. We've just got to make sure we keep pace with each other, and that we don't have too many people ahead or too many people behind us. Julian, what are your closing remarks from the last hour or so?
I think it's been really interesting to have the opportunity to turn some of these thoughts over between us. It is striking how I think a lot of people are trying to get the same things, and we all try and move together to get that. And I think that's my closing thought really is, there is a lot of consensus on what needs to be done. And, we do all have to work together, whether we work with council or representing independent bodies or businesses or, York's flourishing university sector or whatever, to try and get the best outcomes from the city. And I mean, as I say, I grew up in York. Nothing would give me greater pleasure than seeing York, reap an absolutely tremendous set of outcomes from this work. I think I was very pleased a couple of weeks ago to see that we are on the front of the government's decarbonising transport plan. I think that was very good. It shows that we can really lead when we want to, and so I think we have a great future if we all work together.
Fantastic. Rebecca, can I bring you in there, because I see the independents as leading us into this future?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, I don't know what my closing statement is really, but I think we're just glad that me and colleagues at Indie York are invited to be included in conversations like this. Generally independent businesses are smaller businesses. They're often just run, mine is me and my partner. They're run by a single person or just a few people who generally all have the best intentions in these sort of conversations, but don't necessarily know how to push things forwards. And I think you guys sort of recognising Indie York as a body and a way of getting information to all of these businesses is great, because we can feed that back to them, and where they might not have the knowledge or the information, it's nice for you guys at the council and other places to be sharing information and helping, because that's what it's all about.
Absolutely, it's a lot of it is partnership, and an awful lot of it is common sense. It's just that a lot of these people on this call this evening know where all the money or the policies or the information is hidden, and we're more than happy to share that. Just ask, and it would be brilliant, and we'll get examples and show people what they want to do. But really, really pleased with what we're covering this evening. Simon, over to you. Closing remarks.
I'd say, if anyone thinks nothing ever changes, then the last 18 months have been the biggest piece of evidence that just is not the case, haven't they? Things can change very rapidly. I also grew up in York, and when I was born, York didn't even have a university. York wasn't a university town. York was a place that was a bit down at heel. It was dirty and didn't know where it was going. The change in York through my lifetime has been huge, and I hope that the change over the lifetime of people who are just coming into York will also change massively as well. And I think that there's a lot to be hopeful for about our great city, and I'm really looking forward to see actually where we do get to in 10 years' time. And one last thing, 10 years' time, York City are going to be a great football team again.
It's just, you're ever the optimist. My husband was a Man City fan, and I bought him tickets to see Gillingham when they nearly went into Division 3. Now look where they are. Yes, absolutely. Andy, over to you for closing remarks.
Well, I think, as you've heard, the positivity about partnership and getting that collective vision. I know over the years we've had various visions and so on, but I think again it's a really key time post-pandemic to say how do we tackle the whole issue of climate change? What can we do at pace to completely transform things? In the last year we've had the e-scooters and e-bikes. We've had massive changes to the way that we live our lives, working from home and so on. And how can we actually capitalise on that as a collective, as a city, and as individual players, but working together with that that vision about what we can do together, and take people with us, which is obviously, as you say, is a key thing. We want to make it easier for people. And like, just one last thing, my street, when the lockdown happened, we got a little WhatsApp group, and I'm sure lots of other people have got those, you know, sort of micro community communications. They're an opportunity to have these sorts of discussions. What should we be doing in our community, our area, to actually make that change? You know, we swap notes about, you know, somebody can recommend a roofer, or, you know, where to get somebody to come and walk your dog. But why shouldn't we be asking about how can we insulate our houses, transform our transport through those networks that we've got?
Absolutely, absolutely. Right, Andrew, just before I finish off, last over to you for your opinion on what we've done and for summing up, please.
Well, I think everyone has taken a closer look at their local community. We've been restricted in where we can go, and so I think people have a stronger view about the improvements that they'd like to see, and so getting the basics right are really important, but also being positive. I think the examples from areas of the city that have improved is been when the community have pulled around and thought, yes, actually, we're going to be proud of where we are and where we come from. So therefore, I think sharing best practice and being prepared to shout out when York does get it right, yes, that we are prepared to say, this has worked. And so therefore, I think the future is very positive.
Absolutely. And one thing that York people, British people, English people, whatever you want me to call it, are rubbish at is saying when we get it right. And 99 times out of 100, we get it right. And then we make the odd mistake. So yes, a real good reminder of that, Andrew. So thank you. We're into the last couple of minutes. So that's all we've had time for this evening. If any viewers have got comments or questions, please write them in and we'll get back to you later on. The communications team will keep their eye on this Facebook page for the next 24 hours or so. I want to say thank you to all of you who've joined us tonight and to the panelists who've been fantastic and made this discussion really lively, really informative and extremely engaging. Let's keep that going. As we said at the beginning, this isn't the end of the road for our engagement with residents and businesses. The data is being analysed, and as part of this, we will be arranging further conversations with partners, groups of residents and people who may have been underrepresented in the survey. We want our overall insight to be as representative as possible, so it will inform the strategies that shape us for the next decade. I also really wish to thank the 1,900 people who took part in both the business and the resident surveys, which Simon is up to his ears in analysing, and we're grateful for the time that you've taken to share your views with us and again help inform our strategies. In terms of the next step for each strategy, as I said, there will be further stakeholder engagement, people engagement, and this will be published later in the year in consultation and our draft strategies for more feedback. If you wish to be involved, make sure you follow us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and I'm sure my kids could tell you another 10 different ones that we're on, and join our big conversation events. You can also sign up for our residents, families, and climate change or business mailing lists. We've got a new climate change one. I'm just going to plug that one. We've got over 300 people on that. It's got all sorts of advice and great stories. And just, you know, make sure that you keep up to date and keep interested in what we're doing. One last thing, fantastic thank you, really big thank you to all the panelists and everybody watching tonight, and hope you all have a good evening. Goodbye.